Okay, this is the Piercing the Cosmic Veil show with team members Lee Arn and Mick Harrison, Corey Andrews, Jason December, Joseph Jordan, and myself, Corey Pressler, with guest Ian Juby. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, thank you, Corey. Hello, everyone. Special guest today, very special guest. Known this gentleman for, what, almost 20 years now, isn't it, Ian? I know it's been... I know time's been flying, but we've done a lot of good work. Yeah, we go back a long way, and it's been a good way. And just let me give everybody a little background on you. Ian Juby is the host and producer of Genesis Week, the weekly television show devoted to news and commentary on current events related to the Origins debate. Ian is also director, non-voting, of CORE, Ottawa, Citizens for Origins Research and Education, a registered Canadian charity devoted to disseminating the creation science message. Ian is also the founder of Canada's first museum devoted to creation, the Creation Science Museum of Canada. Ian is a member of Mensa Canada and the president of the International Creation Science Special Interest Group for Mensans. He has also had extensive personal studies in origins for some 30 years now. On his internet homepage, you can see and sometimes download projects he has collected for design and tech programs. You can also read some of his creation science notes, check out his itinerary for creation science presentations, or book a presentation for your church, youth, or private group. Ian, welcome to our show. And we're glad to have you. And I know with this specific time that we're in right now, with the world exploding with this information on the UFO phenomenon, you have actually playing a major part in it up there in Canada with your show. And I know you're doing a series right now with the UFO topic and covering what's going on and actually looking at it from a creation and biblical perspective as well. I kind of want to cover some of that here. That's why I brought you on board. So our people can kind of get your viewpoint on all of that. But before we get into that part, take us back to what brought you into all of this anyway, even the idea of creation science, and even from a biblical perspective. Were you always raised as a Christian, or did you start out as a believer, or how did this all come about?
Well, I got saved pretty young, about 13 years old. I was raised in the United Church here in Canada, which is a very generic church here. Got saved when I was 13. Was really on fire for the Lord for a couple of years. And then I basically backslid. I walked away from the Lord for about eight and a half years. Pretty much destroyed my life. But when I came back to the Lord, that's a long story, but basically I wound up down at Last Days Ministries in Texas with Keith and Melody Green. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, the musician Keith Green. His ministry down in Texas. And while I was there at the base, just before I got there at the base, they had gentlemen come in. Because of my background in science, I've been teaching science and tech since I was 16 years old at a science camp here in Canada, which at the time was the only one of its kind in the world. There's a lot now, but so everybody was always coming to me about the science stuff, right? Science and tech. And so I was kind of sort of familiar with the creation evolution debate. I knew a little bit about it, but I really didn't know anything. And they brought in this gentleman because at Last Days Ministries, they had a full television recording studio. And they brought in a guy by the name of Carl Baugh, who has since become a very good friend of mine and a mentor. He came in and did a 3.5-hour lecture off the top of his head. And it was just riveting stuff. I had never heard this stuff before. And so I wound up going and volunteering at his museum for quite a while as well, which was kind of fun because it's like at his museum, you've got engineers from all over the world coming in and visiting. So you just get to sit there and just soak up information. It was great. I loved it. But wound up back in Ontario, where I wound up teaching at a high school here. And that was not expected. I was not looking for a job. I was just going to go back to last days, just go back to missions work. And this door got open through the science camp, and wound up, I worked there I was supposed to work there for 2 weeks, and wound up working there for 10 years. And but while I was there, a couple of one student in particular found out I was really interested in, really into the creation evolution thing, and he was supposed to do a class project on I forget what it was, but it was supposed to be a specific topic. And so he asked the teacher, well, can I bring in Mr. Juby to come and do a presentation for us as part of his project? And that was how I wound up doing my first ever creation evolution talk in a public school, and wound up doing that lots over the next several years, and then wound up leaving the high school to go and do creation science ministry full time. And that was when I built the museum, because as I was giving all these talks, I found more and more that having artifacts like fossils or museum exhibits or anything, having any of that really helped people to see. And it was nice to be able to actually hold and see a fossil too, right? So I started assembling this museum and wound up traveling on the road all over North America with it for about 10 years, actually. And it's funny because when I was on the road, I'd speak to, hundreds of people every week. And it's typically 1 to 3 talks per week with typically 100 to 500 people per talk, right? As well as television appearances and stuff. But at all my talks, I always had questions and answers at the end. They were very popular. And the first probably 4 years, the number one question, which really had nothing to do with creation or evolution, was what about global warming? And my answer to that was very simple. I'm Canadian. I'm all for it, so praise the Lord. Here's hoping. But I saw, it was interesting because of this, and because I'm touring all over North America, I inadvertently had my finger on the pulse of culture as to what was grabbing their attention, what they were asking questions about. And I watched it shift from what about global warming to what about aliens? And what about alien life on other planets? And it all came to a head probably 14 years ago, 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I was speaking at a teen camp, and it was kids as well who were asking me these questions. And sometimes they were curious, sometimes they were concerned, and these are kids, at some of the camps. So I was speaking at a teen camp in Alberta, and in 24 hours, I think I had 8 different people come up to me privately and ask, what about aliens? And I kind of had my opinions, but it was at that point I'm like, okay, I need to get on my knees and pray about this, and what am I going to respond? Mm. And that was when the Lord kicked open the doors. I believe it was around that time I met you. Mm-hmm. And the Lord kicked open doors, and the stuff I found in the next 48 hours, because I didn't have decent internet access. I barely had a functioning cell phone at that time. So it was difficult, but I started calling around as well to, friends all over North America, people that I respected, and started asking them on this topic as well. And to my surprise, over and over again, I kept calling friends, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I was abducted by aliens when I was younger." And another friend I'd known for years. Yep, I went through that too, and over and over again. And that figure, 1 in 40, that we're all so familiar with. 1 in 40 people have been, abducted. If anything, I found that number to be conservative, just in calling around the country. I couldn't believe it. And so anyway, that was what led me on down this research path. Anyway, yeah, that's about it. That was a very long story. You shouldn't have asked for that. Started with
No, that's good. That's good. So bringing it up to this, I just want to let the people out there following us that another reason I wanted to bring Ian on is, the title of our show being called Piercing the Cosmic Veil Show. It's actually titled after Jason and I's book, Piercing the Cosmic Veil. And if you haven't gotten the book out there, I suggest you do, because it's composed of 20 years worth of research and our findings, and it answers a lot of questions that most of you have. And the way I went about putting this together was I knew that questions were going to come after people read this book, so I decided to put the questions in there and the answers first, before the questions came. And the way I did this is on our CE4 Research Facebook page. I offered people an opportunity that followed me already to, what would you ask? You already know my work. What questions do you have that you think should be included in the book? Maybe questions you had before. So I let them come up with the questions, and then I went after the right answers. Now, I made sure that in the book, I let people know that it may not be my answer, because there are other people out there that write better than me. I have a lot of peers that work with me in this field, like Ian, and they write things a little better. They write things a little more specific to the question than what I could put. So I let them know that I would be using peer work as well as my own to answer the question, whichever was best to answer the question. So in the book, on page 137, question number 13 is Ian's answer to question number 13. And this is why I wanted to bring Ian on. Ian looks at this from a different perspective than some of us in the same field. Ian comes at this from a scientific perspective more than like what we look at from a spiritual perspective. Now, this is where I wanted you to kind of give a little review like what you did in the book. How would you answer to these people that ask you the question of, that come to you and say, what do you think the possibility of life out there? How do you answer that from your scientific and creation viewpoint?
Right, and it's important to understand the whole concept of aliens and alien life is firmly rooted in evolutionary theory. It does not come from the Bible. It's not found in the Bible. So where did it all come from? And it's become very popular over the past century since the time of Darwin, and it's become a truism of a sort, where it's assumed that, well, we evolved here, surely life evolved somewhere else in the universe. That's the thinking, and that's where this all comes from. Because when we look at Genesis, Genesis specifically tells us why, when God created the stars in the heavens, the planets, etc., and what they were created for. They were created for us, for signs, for seasons, for times. They were not created for home planet of Zoltar, the space alien. Jesus Christ didn't come to Saturn to die for the Saturnites. He came to Earth to die for humans. So that all of that to say that it is strictly an evolutionary concept. It is not found in the Bible, even though people like Ron Dennington have tried to put them into the Bible. with like the wheel within a wheel or the chariots of the chariots of the gods, as you put it, in Ezekiel. But that's putting an interpretation into a vision. That's not what it's saying. And in fact, I got a question I want to ask you guys about that. Don't forget, okay?
Okay.
Historic UFOs. I want to get your opinions on this. I'm writing it down so I don't forget. So, when we look at life on Earth, the idea that if we evolved here, surely we evolved somewhere else it's first of all, it's mathematically impossible for us to evolve here. Our DNA is literally assembly code on how to build life. If you find a Windows operating system, you don't assume that arose from non-intelligence. Intelligence only comes from intelligence.
Amen.
And there are literally, it's not an exaggeration to say there are millions of reasons to conclude that life cannot arise from nowhere. And one example I gave in the book, which I don't remember what question number 13 was, though.
That was aliens or demons. And the whole, and the whole concept is, you're headed there. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. Okay. So one example I brought up, which I do like to bring up, and it was actually a friend of mine, Stan Lutz, who pointed this out to me. Okay. So the basic building blocks of life, that make up your body, the trees, the birds, everything. Protein. So proteins are built up from amino acids. We have 20 different amino acids, very specific chemical structures, and they join together like Lego. Okay. And there's 20 different kinds to choose from. So if you have two amino acids, you put them together, and just like Lego, you have to take the right, you have to, the 2x8 piece has to go in with a 2x4 piece in the correct order to build whatever it is you're trying to build. If you put in the wrong part, your ultimate construction doesn't work. It's the exact same thing with amino acids and proteins.
It can't be random.
Yes, correct. And so you've got 20 different amino acids to choose from, and a simple protein might be around 120 amino acids long. That's actually a pretty short one. So if you have two amino acids joined together, and one of them, then the different number of different combinations is 20 times 20. You've got two of them, so 400. So if you add a third one on there, it's 20 times 20 times 20. So you get 8,000 different combinations, and bearing in mind, only one is the correct one. So then you add a fourth amino acid. You've got 20 to choose from. So it's 20 times 20 times 20. So you can see quickly the numbers get astronomical real fast. So with a relatively short protein of 120 amino acids long, you have roughly 20 to the power of 200 different combinations that it could be. And of all those, only one is the correct one. Mm-hmm. So now, if you divide the number of seconds, okay, like I don't believe this age, but let's go with it for a second. The average estimated age of the universe is 13.8 billion years. So if we take that and multiply it into seconds, how many seconds you get in 13.8 billion years? You get, believe it or not, only 435. Here, 1 second. 435,196,800. I'm trying to figure out how many decimal places are there. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18 decimal places. So it's actually a surprisingly small number. But in order to arrive at one protein, if you randomly tried one protein at a time, or one amino acid at a time, for 1 per second for 13.8 billion years, okay, you would have to try, okay. I'm trying to figure out, I should have written these numbers down beforehand, because it's a lot of zeros.
Too many to count.
It is. It takes up the entire page, and unfortunately, I didn't write it down in. It's a lot. It's a lot of different proteins you have to try anyway. Okay, so it's I don't know. It's about 30.
Astronomical.
Yeah, it's like 260 different decimal places. That's how many you have to. How many combinations you have to try in the age of the universe to make one protein. So now think about how many proteins you ate for breakfast this morning.
Exactly.
Okay, and those proteins, you have a whole slew, you have a whole library of them. There's a lot of them, and each of them have a different shape, and the machinery that makes them, the plans for that comes from the DNA, but the DNA is manufactured by machines built by proteins, and those proteins, the plans for the proteins come from the DNA. So which came first, the DNA or the proteins?
Right.
Or did they all come at the same time? It's the, which came first, the chicken or the egg question. So
Right.
I always do this let's take what do they call it? A survey. What do you think? Which came first, the chicken or the egg?
It's got to be the chicken. Chicken's got to be there to produce the egg.
Okay, so chicken's the consensus?
Egg. Egg.
One egg. Okay, everyone else is being wisely silent. I don't blame you.
Well, no, it's the chicken's got to be created to produce the egg. In my book, God created the original chicken to produce the egg.
It's a catch-22 question, and it's a non-sequitur.
Right.
It's a non-sequitur.
It could be it could be either or. Actually, it could be either or.
The correct answer is it was the chicken and the rooster that came first.
Okay.
That's right.
But they never ask you that question.
Right.
That's not part of the equation. So it's the same thing here. Which came first, the code in the DNA, or the proteins that assemble the DNA and the code in the DNA? It's a non sequitur to ask which one came first. Right. They all came about at the same time because they were designed to operate with each other, and the code was designed into it and everything. So these astronomical numbers, that's for life here on Earth. So now if you want to produce life elsewhere in the universe, you got to multiply that by 2. So the impossibility odds the impossible odds of infinity to 1, take it and multiply it by 2, because now you got to do it twice in the universe.
It's been squared.
So,
yes.
That's it wouldn't be times 2, it would be squared. That's true.
For those watching out there, it's probably hard for you to comprehend what kind of numbers he's talking about. But in the book, on page 146 and 147, he covers these incredible numbers.
There's the number
please
right
get
there.
this. Yes, they're there. And I tell you what, I'm going to give these to Lee, and she can put them in the final video for people to see, because this is something you really have to comprehend and see for yourself what he's talking about, because it's absolute. When he gave this to me after I asked him to answer this question, I was like, oh my, this one's going to be a jerker right here on the brain. If anybody has any concept of what he's trying to explain here, they're going to realize that there is no possibility for life out there. This is insane to even think that. It's just the belief is all this is. It's nothing more than that. It's just a what if, or, I want it to be. But the possibility, the odds just go against us. So that takes us into the next realm.
Something like 270 zeros in that sequence.
Yeah.
Roughly.
Did you count?
I did a rough calculation.
I was trying to count on the fly, but it's a lot of zeros.
I kind of
didn't write it
cheated.
down beforehand.
So that brings us to the big question: is where we're at now. What we're seeing with all of this so-called pseudo disclosure, and this is what you're covering on your shows right now. And when we get to the end, I'll let you announce where people can watch this. I've been sharing it on our YouTube channel and our Facebook pages for people to see, but I want you to give that for the show here for people that are watching this. Let's talk about that. What do you, tell us what your idea of what's being shown the public right now.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys. It's been a wild ride the past couple of months. I've had to pick my jaw up off the floor repeatedly because I can't believe not just what's coming up, but the volume. you know, and
overwhelming.
And, yes, very much so. Almost daily, it's new stuff coming out. It can't even keep up. You know, I don't know if you guys caught this. Lou Elizondo, the former director of the Pentagon's intelligence division. ATIP. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
So he went on Tucker Carlson again 4 or 5 nights ago, and he had just gotten again another Freedom of Information Act paper. Now Fox News messed up. The one they showed on the air was not the paper he got, but the gist of his paper that he did get was these guys were identifying UFOs flying over military airspace in the United States in the 50s, and they couldn't do anything about it. So this is now going, you know, 7 years ago. So I'm going back. So I mean, stuff like that. It's been almost daily, and it's been fascinating because I kind of went full ADD on today's program. The internet connection is unstable. Oh, okay. I kind of went full ADD on the program today because I've been very, very interested in what they call anti-gravity for 20 years. I've been messing with it. And I don't like that term, but I'll use the term because I don't know what else to use. But it's basically, it was a guy by the name of Thomas Townsend Brown in 1921. So literally a century ago. And he's this 16-year-old kid fooling around in his home lab that his parents set up for him. And he found that when you take a capacitor, which is an electronic component, it's very simple. It's 2 metal plates really close together, separated by an insulator. That's it. You can make them at home. Very, very simple component.
That's what we watched. Yeah.
Yes.
It's like when you're a kid in grade school, you took the two magnets, and if you put them together on the opposite side, there's resistance. So there's that separation between them.
Yes.
Kind of like that?
There's more. No, actually, it's very different. And it gets weird. I'll be honest with you. I was out in my lab. I don't understand it. I can only tell you what I observed. And in fact, it's not because I was getting this backward from what I was expecting. And anyway, what he discovered was if you take a capacitor and those 2 plates, if one is smaller than the other, and you charge it up to a high voltage, it produces a force in the direction of the small plate. Apparently, what happens, and this is what I was doing in my lab, if you take that assembly, charge it up to high voltage, and put it near an object on the weigh scale, the weight of the object on the weigh scale changes. And it doesn't matter whether it's conductive or insulated. So it's not static, it's not electromagnetic. I rolled those out. And I can literally control the weight of an object on the weigh scale. And so this was literally a century ago. And he worked on perfecting this over for several decades. And so I followed this for quite some time. I mean, I've been fooling around with it for 20 years. But right through to, I think it was 1956, is when they started classifying it, putting everything under the veil of top secret. Right up until 58, 59, all of the major aerospace industries in the world, you name it, Grumman, some of the other ones, Lockheed, Bell, Hughes, all of them, they all had research and development divisions exploring this anti-gravity phenomenon because it was going to revolutionize the aerospace industry. And of course it would. I mean, if you can make something float and fly through the air without propellers, without wings, of course you'd be interested. Without, well, yeah, basically. And so they were all researching this and having incredible success. So Brown, in 1956, went and did a demonstration in Pearl Harbor, and he did this in a gymnasium. And interestingly, he used flying saucers, which is of interest to us. His demonstration was with discs. They were literally flying saucers about 3 feet across. He had them tethered, and whatever happened there was so pressed, the U.S. military immediately shut it down and classified everything. A Swiss aeronautics magazine said that when he was flying hundreds of miles an hour in this gymnasium when they were demonstrating. So all he's doing is he's charging these things to high voltage. That's it. But it also had some surreal effects on aerodynamics. And this comes back to what they've been saying in the declassified reports. You guys all saw the Tic Tac UFO. You just all catch that report?
Yeah.
Yes.
From California,
from the Navy.
2004. Yes. And that was 2004. That was 17 years ago. It was a long time ago. And I did the math. So when they first spotted it on radar, you got to understand the ship's radar was not set up to track missiles. It was set up to track aircraft. So if something appeared in the radar and moved really, really fast like a missile, it would disappear from the radar because it wasn't programmed to track it. It would assume it was noise and it would remove it to remove noise from the screen. So Commander Fravor and his backseater fly to investigate this thing. They see it hovering over the water, and it comes up to meet them, and it shoots off so fast that a few seconds later, it's 60 miles away back where they were starting their training episode, their training mission. So 60 miles in a few seconds. But when the ship first got it on radar, it was at 80,000 feet altitude, came down basically sea level in approximately 1 second is what they said on the 60 minutes program. So I did the math. That's 56,000 miles an hour. Whoa. By comparison, we all saw what happened in Space Shuttle Columbia. You know, that was under 17,000 miles an hour. So,
and that's without breaking the sound barrier also.
Apparently.
There was no sound breakage. They didn't hear any of that. So that's another thing they pointed out.
Yes. And this comes back to, I hope it's okay that I come back to this, Joe, because to be honest, this all blurs the lines between the supernatural and just defying physics as we know it. And it's a really, and I'll be honest, I've been struggling with it the past 2 weeks as I'm making this mini series, because it's like, where do you draw the line? If it's defying physics, is it defying physics or is it defying our definition of physics? That's the problem I'm running into. Because I would like to be able to just make a cut and dry statement, oh yeah, this UFO is a supernatural event. This one is not. This one's probably some top secret military thing, right?
I got a question that may point you in that right direction.
Okay.
When this charge is made, this high voltage charge, Does it create a field around the object, or is it just charge the object?
Nope, it creates a field around the object. And that's
does that field, do you know if that field distorts time?
I don't know yet.
Okay, because that's an important question that needs to be determined.
Question.
Because in UFO research, in many of the different sightings, famous sightings, there is what they call the Oz factor that's been reported. And people that are in proximity of the event experience this Oz factor, where they seem to be in this close proximity, which incorporates them in this bubble of the manifestation of the event. Okay? In that, when they're in that proximity, that bubble, there is time distortion. Everything is silent. Okay. And that is a major trigger that seems to show us we're dealing with something that is not of this reality. And I think if you can determine if that effect is there with this man-made ability, or if it's not, I think that's going to be a major determination of what we're dealing with here.
That's a really good point, actually, because I haven't gotten into that. All my reading, I haven't seen anybody mention it, even though time, matter, and space are all very interconnected. So that's a really good question, which I wrote down.
That's why I sent you I think I sent you the stuff on the Zimbabwe school.
Yes. Yep.
That right there, when you listen to that girl, Selma, talk about that experience, she is describing herself, that whole area, being in that Oz factor, that time space distortion that they were experiencing. It is fascinating. And there's other similar stories out there, very famous stories, where that description is made. We actually had one on this show as a testimony, Stacy Jones, that she was in the middle of a city, had a visual experience. There should have been heavy traffic sounds. There should have been the city sounds all around her. But while she's watching the object, it went. I asked the question, and when she recollected, it was absolute total silence. And the comment that everything just stopped, and that seems to be the signature of.
Did you forget?
What? Yeah, you too. Yeah, Jason's the same way.
Me.
Every aspect of what he dealt with is the same.
Oh yeah.
Interesting.
They have nuts and bolts, and silence. What's interesting too is the way that the ships flew that I saw. I can only describe it as if they were in water. They had a strange way that they were moving. It was as if it was as if they were underwater. Take something underwater and push it to the bottom and let it float up and watch it. That's how it appeared to our vision when we were watching that. But zero sound.
Ian, ask him where he lives. Ask him where he lives.
Where do you live?
Huntington Beach, California.
There should have been millions of people seeing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We drove from Newport Boulevard, from Newport Beach to Westminster. It's probably an 11-mile journey. No, probably 13 miles up the coast, PCH. And the first 4 ships were massive. And then the disc ships flew over my side of the truck, low, silent. And then the tic-tac ships were sitting over the ocean above the oil rigs. They weren't white. They were glowing like a neon orange, and they were just placed stationary above the oil rig. And then accompanying all of this were these huge sunlights. I can only call them sunlights. And they were massive balls of light that were floating very slowly. But all of these ships and things, none of them made any sound at all. None.
Mm.
Wow.
And every single time I've seen a legitimate, I mean, when you've had an experience like that and you're watching somebody else's testimony, you're watching a program, you know right away, because I'm waiting for it. If they say, then there was no sound, me and Katie just go, that's legit. That's legit.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting how it happens. I know in my experience, like, you know, I was out in the forest, and out there you have birds and trees, and there was absolute zero noise, nothing. And all
I was going to mention about Bigfoot sightings.
Mm-hmm.
Every single Bigfoot sighting I've ever done research on, that's what they claim also.
Yep. Absolutely.
Really?
And yours went right along with it.
Yes.
I mean,
I
It's
looked
interesting.
at a lot of stuff with David Pauloides and another guy, Steve How to Hunt,
yes.
and they all talk about the silence, which Joe talks about, the Oz factor.
Yep.
Just total silence, and it's really bizarre how
There's
whatever it is manipulates the
the
environment.
connection.
Mm.
It's
Which-
like what they call a temporal distortion, you know.
Right.
Which
I've never
brings-
heard that about Bigfoot before. I've got a lot of cryptozoology friends. I've even done some research on it myself. I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Huh.
Which brings to the next one. Where was I going with that?
I'm sorry.
How do you explain, how would a scientist best describe, from your vocabulary, a spiritual manifestation? A biblical spiritual manifestation. I've been looking for this to try and put it into words.
They wouldn't. They would, at least in my mind, they would default to science studies the natural realm. It is limited to that realm, which is why these UFO reports that are coming out are significant, because you've got a problem. Either your definition of physics is wrong, or we've got something beyond the natural. In either case, it's outside of the realm of the scientific, or so it would appear. Perhaps it's new physics, and which is kind of what I'm leaning towards with a lot of these sightings. But in either case, it puts you in a difficult position, and I would see them just saying flat out, it is extra natural, supernatural, it is beyond the natural, scientifically, paranormal, can't say anything about it. So
It's kind of like what you're hearing from Louis Elizondo. He's trying to tell us we kind of got to look at it from a whole new aspect,
yes.
He's almost coming out and saying that it's spiritual, and he's wanting to talk exactly the way we are, but he's secular, and he's like
Joe,
right
Joe,
there.
did you see
Like
me
you,
the
Joe.
clip of the interview with him? He was being interviewed, and he was in the middle of his interview. I don't know how long ago this was, but they asked him. I guess he felt comfortable. He's sure not going to do this on the Washington Post interview, and he's not going to do it on the New York Times interview. But it was some journalist that I think he felt comfortable with, and he said that he had, when he was working with that program and leading that program, he said that he had one of his superiors say to him, "Well, we know what they are," and he said, "Well, what are you talking about?" And he said, "They're it's demonic."
He asked him if he'd been studying
I mean,
his
that's
Bible.
what he said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was from the Debris show.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're trying to, from what I'm getting out of this whole thing is they're doing a soft disclosure. I think my feeling on this is they know more than they're leading on.
Absolutely.
And, I talked about this on a recent show. This all goes back to the Brookings Institute report that NASA paid for back in the 60s when they started sending, craft out there. And one of the things they thought about was, what if we come across something that says there's life or there was life how do we deal with the public? You know, what's going to be the effects on the public if we were to release that information? So they went to a think tank, the Brookings Institute, and said, here's some questions we need answers to, you know, and put your heads together and let us know what we're going to be dealing with here. And that famous Brookings report has been used by ufology for, you know, 30, 40 years now, 50 years. And they use it against everybody. They're saying that, especially against religion, the world face, they're saying that, you know, if it's announced that we're not alone, that it's going to affect the world religions, you know, on this earth. But I think that this whole thing is going to be backwards.
Right.
I think it's going to be the opposite. Right. And I think that's what they're afraid of.
Yeah. Hey, Joe, I mean, originally, I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I truly believe this is fallen angel technology that came from Germany originally. And I think it was brought here after the war. Obviously, look at NASA. And if you do your homework, you can kind of put the pieces together. That's what I think.
In my honest opinion, I believe that they're just trickle feeding information to research and development. Basically, they're not like back engineering anything. I think they're just telling us, you do this, you put this together, and they just slowly give it to us like a carrot on a stick. And meanwhile, we probably allow them to do all kinds of just horrible things.
I mean, I've been watching this playbook with them for the last 8 years with my eyes wide open. You got to be kidding me! They're setting us up for the next event.
There was a very famous guy, and he said the last card they'll play is the UFO.
Strong delusion.
And here it is.
Strong delusion.
So, Ian, your question.
Yes, this plays in perfectly, actually. So I ran into this week because I've been approaching this from the perspective that at least all these ones that are coming, all these reports coming out, I'm looking at them in awe. I think it's just super tech. Personally, I think, in the words of Donald Trump, China. I think they have a lot to do with it. But when we go back in time to historic UFO sightings, so the way I've been looking at this is that, okay, the UFO sightings we're seeing released from the military, to me, they're all just black tech. It's not I haven't seen anything indicative so far that it is aliens. Now, I might be wrong on that. That's fair. Because right now, like I said, it's blurring the lines between the supernatural and, what we know about physics. But let's go with it for a second, and let's say that all is super tech. And we're going to learn about it real quick. When we look at historic UFOs, and so the way I was looking at it was these events did not involve aliens coming and talking to people, dialoguing, bringing a message, things like that. So I've sort of been using that as a dividing line between what is, perhaps beyond our knowledge of physics and what is actually legitimately supernatural, demonic manifestation. So that's kind of the way I was looking at it. But when we look at some of the historic UFOs, and maybe you guys can enlighten me on this, I'm thinking the Romans and the Greeks with their flying shields, for example.
Sure.
Stuff like that. Columbus as well. I'm not aware of Columbus.
Yeah, he's got a report in his logbook.
Yep. Wasn't it a floating candle he described it as?
Yes. It was like a menorah is what he first described it as. And
right.
I think the Catholic Church flipped out about it and they changed the description. But yeah, it was a menorah candle is what he first pretty sure described that as.
And there was no interaction with entities, aliens, anything like that?
Not with him.
Okay.
But
And
there
I
were
don't
during the airship days during the
Yes.
Admiral Byrd.
1800s. Yeah.
Dirigibles.
Yeah. No,
Yes.
before that, the airships that they were seeing.
Oh, right.
Okay. So here's what I'm getting at. I can see, for instance, the Zimbabwe encounter as a classic example. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I can see this all tying into the strong delusion, but I don't understand why there would be demonic manifestations, say, of a flying shield that flies over a bunch of people, has nothing to do with the people. I can't see any way that was being used to like bring in the deception or mislead people or communicate with them. There seemed to be no interaction with these beings. It's just sightings. So and that comes back to what I'm dealing with now, where we've got these sightings of craft with no interactions with possible demonic entities. So are they super high tech, or are they sort of a repeat? Why would demons do that? Is what I'm getting. Why would they turn themselves into a field?
You know,
Ian, it's all
I
about creating and causing confusion and chaos, I guess.
Well, also, you guys, you got to go back to the Bible. If you read Revelation, you're talking about the great war in heaven. I mean, there's a lot going on right now in heaven. So I don't think that everything that's seen is demonic. I think that there are all kinds of things happening in the spiritual realm. Yeah, that's my opinion. I've talked to people several times.
It's forbidden technology that was brought here by Satan, and Satan is playing his game with these angels. I think that's what I think.
Keep this in mind too. A lot of these sightings that you see ufology use from ancient times, the descriptions, even though I gave you the one from Columbus, a lot of those are being used by ufology to show that this has been going on for centuries and centuries. Okay, I said used by ufology. That doesn't mean it was spiritual. That doesn't mean it was extraterrestrial. Doesn't mean anything. That means that somebody reported seeing something they couldn't identify. This is the best description they gave. And ufology, with their glasses on, of UFO glasses, are using that to say, oh, no, this has been going on forever. You got to keep in mind that there are a lot of instances, well, we know there are, because as a MUFON researcher has been doing this for 20 years, we know that 98% is misidentified, okay? Right. So you have to logically go back to, most likely this stuff is just misidentified things that people didn't know what they were seeing, gave the best description that they could, it got recorded, and here, 500 years later, 1,000 years later, these guys that are into aliens and flying saucers are using this information to support their own beliefs. So a lot of this historic stuff, which we can't put a finger on because this is that stuff that you can't verify because we weren't there. Okay. This is that, you deal with the same thing, Ian, with history of, dealing with, animals from way back when. They can say it's a million years old. Well, how do we know that? We weren't there a million years ago. You got to use other means to be able to base that on. This is the same type of thing. I mean, I wouldn't jump to that it was a spiritual thing. I have to go with the most logical first and most potential of issues first, which is going to be a misidentification. Okay. I mean, these guys described what they saw. It doesn't mean that they knew what it was. And again, there was no behavior involved. There was no effect involved. And that's a key thing to look at. There was nothing that made any difference to them. It's just that it puzzled them, which is the same thing we're dealing with. We get I gave you the reports, 700 of those in the U.S. just last month of people seeing things that puzzled them. you know, but there was no communication, there was no message, there was no nothing. But if somebody sees those reports 1,000 years from now, what are they going to think? The same thing we're talking about? You know?
Also, I wanted to add, we didn't have a database for all of this back then, you know?
No.
Like, I would say that, would you say, Joe, that UFOs became more prominent in the last 100 years or so? Or last 50 years?
Yeah, well, a lot of it started up around the time of H.G. Wells writing his science fiction stuff, you know?
1930.
Or even a little, well, he was, you know, goes back to late 1800s when they first started into some heavy science fiction, otherworldly stuff.
With a lot of these sightings, you know, when someone sees a giraffe, they see a giraffe. If they see a swan, they see a swan. And if they see a thing they think is a UFO, then I think it's a UFO. Like, I don't know, like when people describe stuff, it's like when people see Yowies and Sasquatch and, you know, Bigfoot, they're not seeing black bears or brown bears or, you know, they're seeing this stuff, you know, and a bear's a bear and an elephant's an elephant and whatever they're describing is what they're seeing, Joe. You know, I think, I don't know. But I think they use it somehow or other. There's some sort of technology that's being used in the whole thing.
I'm subscribed to a YouTube channel called Mr. MB333, and he does a lot of sky stuff. He's based out of Arizona, and I've been watching him for years. And he takes videos that are sent in from people that see things in the sky that are actually videotaped, and then he brings them, he scrubs them the best he can to make sure they're legitimate, and then he shows them. Just running the algorithm and the conversion ratio in the last 3 years, the amount of what he shows now from individuals sending in videotapes that you can clearly see that he's vetted out. The sightings have, to me, have compounded themselves so much it's ridiculous. And I think that's accompanying the soft disclosure. I think it all is just slowly rolling to a head together. The public seeing it as more, and so as much as the government is propagating this whole thing. That's just my opinion. And
I agree on that, but seeing what? We still can't even say what they're seeing.
They can't, no, he's not saying they're alien. He's not saying anything. He keeps it real clear.
But there's not even we can't even identify what they're seeing.
Right, but we can look at the videotapes of what they're filming on their iPhones, and we can look at them and say, well, that's something, that's not a plane, it's not a bird, so that's really interesting. Then we leave it at that.
Exactly. That's all it is it's something.
Yeah, we leave it at that. I mean, but the amount of those things that are happening
the reason I say that is I go back to Mick saying, well, you know, it's a bear or a giraffe. No, it's a Bigfoot. No, these things, they can't say what it is. It's different than that.
Yeah, no, they're not saying anything. He keeps it real. I got another video out of blah blah blah. I got another video out of blah blah blah. I've got 3 of these videos. They show.
If they're referring to it as a UFO, well, it clearly means unidentified flying object. So that's what they're referring to.
But the point is that's not getting to the point of what we're seeing. You know, if you say you see a giraffe, it's a giraffe. You know, but to say you see something identified, that's not giving an identification. When you say you see something unidentified, that's not an identification.
Right.
That's the difference there. That's why we're having such a problem with all of this. I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to. I was privy 2 or 3 years, no, longer than that, probably 7 years ago, to see a black and white photograph of a UFO that was taken in the 60s. It was on a black and white, about 10x12 photograph. And it was the clearest photograph I've ever seen in my life, ever. And it was like someone taking a photograph of a 1962 Chevy Impala, which I think all the viewers and everyone sitting here knows what a Chevy Impala looks like. And this thing was the clearest, sharpest photograph I've ever seen ever, with trees in the background, this thing sitting there, and it was seamless. And, you know, it didn't have anything written on it. It was just there, and it was about 30 feet off the ground. And I remember looking at this photograph and just, I nearly started crying, because I thought, I'm holding something and looking at something that we're told is absolute, I did not say that word, but bull dust. And I handed it back, and it was put back in a file, and that to me was just 100% evidence that we've been lied to, big time. But,
the difference is there, you're talking an actual craft.
Yes.
Not a unidentified.
No, it was a classic UFO. It was
a classic craft.
Yes.
Not a UFO.
Well, UFO is unidentified. This was identified.
That's what I would say about.
Under the classification, or however you know, like say what you're seeing, this was a UFO. As far as I'm concerned, I'm a pilot or ex-pilot, and there isn't too many aircraft that fly that I don't know about. You know, helicopters, planes, rockets, bombs, you name it. I've seen most, and this thing was a UFO.
What I'm getting at,
a craft. Sorry.
Yeah, and that's what I want to be, people to be understanding and specific about. Is we're getting a lot of reports of things that are unidentified, not the specific identified. Not the specific